Good evening. I'm Rudy El-Khoury, Dean of the School of Architecture. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this special occasion. This year marks the Centennial of the University of Miami. Actually, to be precise, yesterday was the precise anniversary, and I hope you enjoyed the big party. Did you check it out? 100 years since a visionary group of citizens imagined a university that would serve and shape a young, ambitious city. Since opening its doors in the aftermath of a hurricane and the collapse of the South Florida land boom, the university has grown into one of the nation's premier research institutions. From its early days as Centennial to its current standing as a proud member of the AAU, UM now ranks among the top universities in the country, an achievement that we all share in and celebrate. It's been a great pleasure to hear about all the achievements and the great heartwarming stories in the last few days as part of the celebrations. The School of Architecture has played a meaningful part in these stories, established as a department in the 1950s and gaining autonomy as a school in 1983. It has grown into an internationally recognized center for design, education, civic engagement, and environmental innovation. We are proud of our faculty, students, and alumni whose work continues to shape communities in South Florida and beyond. In celebration of the Centennial, the School of Architecture is awarding a series of Centennial medals to a select group of alumni whose achievements exemplify the mission and spirit of our institution. This evening, we are honored to present the inaugural medal. And to share more about the medal and upcoming Centennial initiatives, and to introduce our first medal recipients, please join me in welcoming our formidable former dean, who not only helped shape the school, but also our city with the Miami 21 zoning code and the field with the impact of the new urbanism, Dean Elizabeth Platter-Zyber.
Thank you, Dean. Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the School of Architecture's first Centennial Medal recipient, Larry Kearns, class of '85, right? You have some colleagues here. But before I introduce Larry, let me say a few words about the school's contributions to the university's Centennial celebrations. There are several events that we have focused on. The school's Centennial Medal Design Competition, the Black and White Ball, which will occur April 25th, organized by the students. More information is on the school website. You have to register. There is a fee. The school council makes a little bit of money putting this together, but it's a lot of fun to be all together in that way. So you're all invited. And the third event will be the school's publications exhibit. The medal and the exhibit are intended beyond this year's celebration to build a record of the impact of the school's faculty and alumni on the built and natural environment and on the intellectual life of the profession. So I'd like to describe them to you briefly. The medal has been established celebrating the university's 100-year legacy, recognizing alumni, and we assume along the way other constituents of our school who have made a significant contribution to the profession and its education and to communities. We hope to recognize 25 honorees over the coming years. In addition to being honored for their high ideals and achievements, recipients will be selected for their professional and community leadership and to represent aspirational models for our students at the beginning of their professional trajectory. The Centennial Medal will also serve as a testament of the influence of the school in advancing the university's mission to transform lives. We have invited all of you to submit to our design competition for the medal. Our alumnus, David Swetlin, has assembled a beautiful series of references for numismatic design, which you should have received in an email, along with design submission instructions. And if you'd like to get a copy, please let me know before the end of the evening. The medal design will be selected this spring and cast during the summer. Larry Kearns is finding out just now that he'll be leaving this evening empty-handed, and that he will receive the medal when it is ready. He's also invited to submit a design. Now, the publications exhibit will be shown here in Corach in the fall. This will be a display of significant publications by faculty, staff, and alumni as far back as we can find them. These are to be primarily books, reports, and pamphlets produced for both an academic and a broad public audience. We've already started making the list, and it's really impressive. While a selection committee of faculty and alumni will determine which are to be included in the exhibit, it's intended that the entire list, including journal entries and shorter publications, essays, will be made available on the school's website. And so for all of this, we invite your submissions. Now to introduce our medalist. Larry Kearns is a licensed architect and a LEED accredited professional. After graduation from Miami and following international experience with large firms, he started a practice called Wheeler Kearns Architects in Chicago. I'm glad he's already showing in his first slide how you can be in touch with them. Developing a career of rich experience that he will describe this evening. One of his early works, the 1990 design for the La Pointe residence in Buchanan Township, Michigan, was featured in the School of Architecture's celebration of the university's 75th birthday. I just found the publication in my office. An exhibition we titled Building Through Time, The Making of a School of Architecture 1926 to 2001. You may not know that there were architects in the founding of the university, and there was a program early in the years of the university. Larry's work has evolved, as he puts it, seeking projects that have ambitious social, economic, and environmental goals. And he has been producing design innovations for energy conservation, for educational programs, and community building. These have been recognized in publications, in numerous awards, and with invitations to lecture to a variety of audiences. The audiences have a remarkable range, including South by Southwest, the American Society of Association Executives, their Great Ideas Conference, the Mid-Atlantic Association of Museums, to just describe a few. Display the breadth of knowledge he has to share. In 2008, Larry was named Chicago Tribune's Chicagoan of the Year in architecture, and in 2016, he was elevated to fellowship in the American Institute of Architects. We are thrilled that he has agreed to be our first alumni medalist and that he is here this evening with us to speak about his work. Please welcome Larry Kearns.
Well, thank you to Dean Elcoury and Liz Platter-Zyberg for inviting me to speak with you this evening. As Steve Jobs told his graduating class in 2005, you can only connect the dots by looking backward. The first person to flap their butterfly wings, sending me on a dramatically new course, was a fellow high school senior. 4 miles from here, after the bell rang in Mr. Codd's calculus class, a classmate asked me where I was going to go to college. I told her I was going to Carnegie Mellon to study graphic design. And she winced and told me, no, you're good at math and you're good at art. You should become an architect. I can't remember her name, but she changed my life. Since Carnegie Mellon told me I had to reapply to study architecture, I became the first of 4 brothers to attend UM, courtesy of a generous scholarship program aimed at stemming the brain drain out of South Florida. From what I could tell, that program worked wonders. To help you travel back to 1980, here are some notable events from that year. My senior prom in May was aborted because of the McDuffie riots, which heavily impacted Liberty City and nearby neighborhoods. The Mariel boat lift was in full swing then and would last until Halloween. In 1980, 20% of Miami real estate deals were paid in cash as the underground drug economy reached $11 billion annually. To further help you time travel, these are things that did not exist during my 5 years here. The U hand gesture, the end of the Cold War, basketball, Burmese pythons in the Everglades, the Miami Heat, the Miami Marlins, Florida Panthers, the ADA, Hurricane Andrew, sunny day flooding, Wynwood Walls, where we have a project next door in Edgewater, by the way, the Miami Design District, where we also have a current project, and South Beach. In fact, we rented on the ground floor, I'm almost certain it was the Delano Hotel, for our 5th year Beaux-Arts Ball. As an incoming freshman, I was clueless. I brought a calculator to my first design class since I thought we'd be computing the strength of beams. I couldn't believe you got to draw and create. I was delighted. But my most explicit memory from my first design semester was an instructor's unnecessary and demoralizing comment on the first day. Don't worry, you're not going to come up with an idea that someone else already hasn't had. And he then chuckled cynically. But my spring design critic flipped the switch for me. Mark Reeves, now a Miami real estate construction attorney, opened my eyes to a new world of possibilities. He introduced me to a pattern language, then a 3-year-old book describing 253 interconnected patterns or principles for designing spaces that foster well-being. Architecture was no longer a methodical left-brained pursuit, but an exciting people-centric enterprise welcoming poetry and prose. I have never thought of it differently since. I still have my original copy, and I keep a Kindle version on my iPad. The book was about recognizing patterns. Isn't that what AI does? More on that later. The book's method and message have never faded. Fast forward 34 years, and we're in the Walton Family Foundation's conference room in Bentonville, Arkansas, home of Walmart. We're presenting ideas for what will soon be known as the Momentary. In the tradition of a pattern language, we each speak about 6 design principles represented by an object in the case we brought that we will weave into an experimental and multidisciplinary arts complex. The place is for people, including the 10,000 new Bentonville residents who arrived while we worked on the project for 5 years. Housed in a former 1947 Kraft cheese plant, the Momentary is a satellite of Alice Walton's Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. The project opened right before COVID with Bahamian artist Tavera Strawn's You Belong Here welcoming everyone. Since continuity was a core principle symbolized by a Mobius strip, we riddled the site with looping, walking, and bike paths circumnavigating a new 7-acre backyard. Of course, you enter the Momentary through the back door. Friends use the back door. We retained the plant's authenticity, another principle represented by a passport, by keeping the structure intact, except for 4 glass additions in noteworthy locations, including the back door. It is a place of spectacle, another principle represented by binoculars, where Bandaloop dances at least every 5 years on the stair tower's glass facade, which we designed for projection or to be lit from the back. Former factory spaces were and are allowed to evolve, symbolized by an apron, another principle, into completely new identities and uses. We made new connections, another principle symbolized by a smartphone, between spaces estranged for decades, including introducing the sky to the former 80-foot-tall fermentation tower. But not all spaces are monumental. We designed one of the glass additions for intimacy, a final principle symbolized by a fire starter for a campfire, where a cushy fabric ceiling makes conversation effortless while enjoying a drink and a panoramic view of the city. My first architecture job was dull as dishwater, drafting gas stations for a Coconut Grove architect. That changed dramatically after I started working for the Roman emperor pictured here in my second year. As a Polish Jew in World War II, Jan Hochstim used his talents to forge documents to outwit the Nazis. After the war, he met his wife in a refugee camp in Eastern Europe and set sail for Miami Beach. He earned an architectural engineering degree from UM before heading up my way to the University of Illinois for his Bachelor of Architecture in 1957. He started teaching here the next year, and after hearing Louis Kahn speak on campus during the tumult of 1968, he pursued an MFA focused on Kahn's artwork. This photo was taken circa 1982 outside the engineering building at the start of our annual chariot race. I am the gladiator in a gold helmet, almost completely hidden behind Chris Ranke, our student AIA leader, and ready to be pulled to victory by Tom Frechette on the right. This annual event transmuted to a cardboard boat race after we divorced the engineers and moved to the shores of Lake Osceola in 1984. My team won the inaugural cardboard boat race, but Jan disputed the use of cardboard tubes for oars. In the 1960s, Jan was joined on the faculty by Paul Buisson, a Frenchman from Dijon who trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. After the war, Paul married an American poet and librarian and moved to Illinois and North Carolina. Like Jan, Paul taught architectural history in addition to design at UM. Paul and Jan worked together on architectural projects too, including the university's original Mark Light Stadium. When I started working for Jan, Paul was dedicating his time to teaching. But I got to know Paul well because we used to fish in his canvas kayak in the Everglades. Lots of great memories there. For my third year design studio, Jan and Paul were joined by Ari Milas, a Carnegie Mellon graduate with a master's from the GSD who came to UM in 1974. His parents had immigrated from Greece. So I'm being taught by three instructors, all fluent in a different European language. One was classically trained. One had an engineering degree and an MFA. Another had recently designed an NFL stadium. All were trained during the height of modernism and the social upheaval of the 1960s. Let's call this polycultural gift number one. Our studio project was to redevelop the Wholesome Bakery site, which suffused US 1 with delightful smells just south of the university. Like most fellow students, I obliterated everything, tabula rasa, because new was always better. I remember thinking how clever it was for Brenda, one of our classmates, to retain the water tower, and how clever it was to keep the part of the site story intact. But remember that thought for later. Jan, Paul, and Ari declared the semester's focus to be the social impact of architecture. Even though I had pattern language under my belt, I remember being flummoxed by how bricks and mortar could foster social interactions. Architecture was about beautifully disposing parts of a given program. You know, the program already solved the problem. You just had to put the pieces together skillfully. I have spent my entire career disproving my third-year wisdom. The student program is a proxy, a necessary stand-in. You only understand a design problem when you understand the client's perspective and pain points. And that road to empathy is paved with learning and more learning. Buildings are not neutral bystanders. They either support or frustrate a client's mission, especially for a client seeking to build human capital, making people run faster and jump higher. Like this triple bottom line project, which values people, planet, and profit equally, and serves delicious meals in Chicago's largest food desert, while credentialing underemployed and unemployed trainees in 13 weeks in a kitchen overlooking Chicago's Garfield Park. Or an underutilized cafeteria transformed into a social hub at the Uruguayan American School in Montevideo, where students from 35 countries learn from each other in a cultural medley. Or Sweet Beginnings, a social enterprise that operates 5 urban apiaries in Chicago. They've already altered the trajectory of over 500 returning citizens' lives with transitional employment and financial education. while offering honey-infused food and drinks in a cafe in the North Lawndale neighborhood of Chicago, where Martin Luther King lived in protest in 1966. That neighborhood is still recovering from the riots that erupted the night King was assassinated in 1968, still recovering 57 years later. Polycultural gift number 2, the Ivy League wave arrives. Liz Platter-Zyberg, Princeton and Yale, joined the faculty in 1979. Joanna Lombard, Tulane and GSD, joined the faculty in 1980. In 1981, Jose Gelbert Navia arrived from Cornell. Teofilo Victoria Rizdi in Columbia arrived in 1982. This contingent brought new perspectives and ideas, complementing those of Tom Spain and Tomas Lopez Gotardi, who had joined the faculty in the 1970s. There was talk of the meaning behind the language and grammar of architecture. Rational architecture was big at first. Postmodernism was peaking, and the bedrock of what would become new urbanism was being laid. This is one of my third-year projects, influenced by the Ivy Wave, which won a national student wood competition. I spent the prize money on a new outboard motor. I took out 2 student loans during my time at UM. One was to finance a semester abroad in Venice in 1984, including a multi-week stay in Rome and Florence. The other was to witness Dan Marino lose to Joe Montana in the 1985 Super Bowl. My semester abroad was a better value. It opened my eyes to timescales foreign to Miami and the idea of building on the past instead of replacing it. I roomed with Fast George and Slow George. He's second from the left. Before we arrived in Rome, they took me skiing in Switzerland the day after I saw snow for the first time. What could go wrong with 2 Cubans teaching you to slalom down a mountain overlooking the Matterhorn? I still have PTSD. In Venice, I started exploring designing cultural touchstones with biomorphic forms, which I predicted would someday become commonplace with the digital revolution. I nailed that one. Although I underappreciated the Ivy Wave's urban design focus at the time, the perspective has been a lifelong blessing. When you ignore property lines, you're constantly working of small pieces of a boundless fabric, some patches that don't need replacing and others that need just some clever stitching. My newfound respect for building on the past was instrumental a decade later when we had to turn a quiet 1929 library into a folk music school. While down the street, we turned Louis Sullivan's music store into a quiet office for a graphic design firm. Within the last decade, on the south side of Chicago, we turned a church into a gymnasium. While at the same time, we turned a gymnasium into a church for a shrine in a western Chicago suburb. In 2014, we turned a Chicago lumberyard into an unorthodox middle school, high school. Here, students learn independently from peers and instructors at their own pace, mastering each topic before moving to the next. In the first year, one age group split into 6 different levels of math in one room. Nobody was bored or lost. I found this remarkable. Personalized learning fosters cognitive diversity. But was cognitive diversity a real benefit? I went on a detour to answer that question, which I'll take you on now. Online crowdsourcing quickly proved that outsiders with different perspectives and skills could solve problems that vexed the most talented insiders. Many comfortably siloed companies started offering rewards to the public to solve their intractable problems. Was there an objective truth behind the intelligence of the crowd, or was it just a fad? Let's look at the math. Let's assume there are only 52 perspectives and skills someone could possess to solve a problem. In this example, designer Jill has 15 perspectives and skills. Designer Jack only has 12. The more talented designer Jill should tackle the problem, right? But there's a 1 in 450 million chance that Jill has all of Jack's perspectives or skills. In fact, there are more than 14 trillion possible combinations of 52 perspectives and skills. The math suggests that my first-year design instructor was not only cynical, but dead wrong. We have no reason to sell ourselves short. So with math on my side, I started experimenting by entering crowdsourcing competitions, wondering if my perspectives and skills as an architect were valuable to other disciplines. In 6 years, I won 13 challenges outside architecture, which funded many elaborate vacations for my family. One of the challenges I lost really captured my imagination. It sought ways to deploy solar energy on the Midwest's vast farmlands without destroying the environment. I continued to develop a solar generator, became a finalist in the third round of the DOE Solar Prize, won another DOE grant, entered an accelerator, and received a US patent. 5 years later, I'm still at it. Now, back to more eye-opening stories. Polycultural gift number 3. During my second year, Arthur Bowen, a graduate from London who joined the faculty in the mid-70s, opened my eyes to design aligned with nature. A colleague, Robert Hazley, a Pratt graduate, joined him that same year. From what I can tell, their perspectives were influenced by the energy crisis of the early 1970s, when I remember waiting in long lines at gas stations as a kid. When I started at UM, Ronald Reagan was about to rip off the solar panels on the White House that Jimmy Carter installed. So talking about saving energy was completely anachronistic. However, Arthur and Robert gave me a knowledge gift I could open 20 years later when climate change and sustainability became mainstream. I'll never forget one of Arthur Bowen's classes. He tried to begin lecturing, but he was unable to. One of his clients, Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, had just been assassinated. Arthur was devastated. His work with Sadat was leveraging the passive technologies he was teaching us. 29 years later, I began work on this LEED Gold gymnasium, which used many passive techniques he taught us, including the benefits of an outsulated thermal mass. And even in our high-end residential work, the geo-exchange or geothermal systems that Robert Hazley prophesied have become utterly commonplace. Before the School of Architecture and the Business School collaborated to share real estate development insights, I created my own program by taking a series of finance courses in my third, fourth, and fifth years. Learning the time value of money was eye-opening. In my final real estate class, I created a Lotus 123 spreadsheet modeling a real estate development that one of Jan's clients was considering near Little Havana. This gave me incredible insights for my first job after graduation. Other insights came from polycultural gift number 4. Basil Honickman, a native of Cape Town, South Africa, was chair of the Department of Architecture in the 70s. He was a big runner who helped organize the Orange Bowl Marathon. He was using these newfangled IBM PC XTs to wrangle the reams of runner data. Roger and I took a computer class he offered in 1985. We worked with AutoCAD version 1.0 and printed drawings using this HP pen plotter. It grabbed individual felt-tipped colored pens and drew on paper that shifted back and forth. Roger and I processed the marathon data during winter break. It was my first time working with an extensive database, and that experience quickly became incredibly valuable. At our graduation celebration, Lewis of Richard and Lewis flapped his butterfly wings, sending me on a dramatically new course. He said I already had small firm experience and should work for a big firm in a big city on big projects while making a decent salary. I started working for SOM Chicago in October 1985. Soon after, they offered me a job to lead their computer department in Houston. I declined. I wanted to work on projects. For 3 years, I leveraged my urban design, finance, and computer experience on the infrastructure and the form-based zoning code for Canary Wharf in London, a 16 million square foot Maggie Thatcher legacy. They flew me back and forth on the Concorde. In 1985, the site you see was completely bare, except for some World War II bomb craters. When I came to interview with SOM in Chicago, Eastern Airlines lost my luggage and failed to route it to my hotel as promised. It was nearing 6 p.m. I grabbed the yellow pages, hailed a cab, and rented a shiny polyester suit from a sketchy place on the north side. I needed a shirt and tie. My classmate, Monique Chenwai Hong, had told me that there was a large department store near Chicago's famous water tower. I got on a bus and stared out the window, looking for the water tower on my way back downtown. When I saw this image, I got off the bus, crossed the street, and bought the first shirt and tie I saw. The next morning, I interviewed with Bruce Graham, not knowing that he was the author of the Hancock and Sears Tower and led the largest architectural office in the world at the time. We talked fishing, and he told me I did not want to live in New York City or LA. 40 years later, just months ago, we finished a project behind that water tower facade for Looking Glass Theater, which David Schwimmer of Friends fame co-founded in 1988. Looking back at my years, I don't know if I could have better connected the dots for my future. So many people opened my eyes from so many different cultures with unique perspectives and expertise on so many different topics. Don't get me wrong, I learned lots of obsolete skills like hand lettering and Lotus 123. But learning and being inspired to learn how to learn more has been a lifelong gift. Now, as my university turns 100, here is an eye-opening story I offer from the future. Artificial general intelligence, which expertly recognizes patterns, incorporates common sense reasoning by 2027. By the 2030s, nearly everyone has access to a country of Nobel Prize winners able to answer any question. Software from generative AI companies like Cubic, which launched in the mid-2020s, generates over 1,500 solutions to any architectural problem, down selects the top 3 designs, and produces video walkthroughs of all 3 alternatives in less than 24 hours. Architects who designed buildings that were merely money-making machines are obsolete. Thriving architects focus on the human aspects of architecture, empathy, cultural sensitivity, ethics, and intuition. They use AI as a co-pilot. As Joanna Lombard correctly predicted in one of my second-year crits, architects who cultivate interdisciplinary knowledge persevere. They reach beyond their affinity group to build trustful and collaborative relationships with clients and offer visions and possibilities that AI can't compete with. So, like Alice, as the School of Architecture steps through the looking glass into a very strange next century, we can do so confidently, carrying armfuls of gifts left to us by a remarkably diverse generation of talented educators. Thank you.
Would you like to?
I was quite taken that we have some questions prepared, but I was quite taken by some phrases, many phrases that you used, including the road to empathy, which I think is the road you've been traversing to make such a wide variety of projects, which require so many different skills and understanding so many different client groups. And so that's one that I think is just an incredible lesson for us all. And you've given us a look into a future in which the machines will be helping us do that.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you could make a connection between the machine giving 3 or the software, it's really not a machine, giving the 3 potential solutions and this issue of empathy.
Yeah, I have to say, the first time I saw one of these generative AIs, it was very crude and imperfect, but it was clear that this was going to come to pass much sooner than anybody could envision. So I do believe that this will happen. But I think the sort of machine produced designs will be devoid of any sort of personal human insight. They can solve a problem of geometry or space or economy. But I have to say, I cannot remember the last time a client gave me a program for a building, and I'm serious. Nobody gives me programs anymore. They come to me and they come to us with a problem to solve. And they generally have an idea about the size of the building and so on. They've done some homework, but oftentimes, and even when a client does come with a program, it's written by somebody who didn't understand the real problem in the first place. So I think the road to empathy is really, as I say, paved by learning and learning, but it's really learning about what the real problem they need to solve. And so many of the sort of AI generated issues or ideas or whatever are just going to be something that perhaps certain people will curate one idea better than the other. But I do think as an assistant, it will help us get there faster, but cannot possibly replace the empathy a human can have and the understanding of a multi-dimensional problem, which all these projects are.
Well, Larry, I have to thank you profusely for the wonderful lecture, because it was so specific to the particular circumstances of the Centennial. So, we invest a lot in our lecture series. Sometimes I have doubts, because everything is available online. Our speakers come here and you can find their lectures online on YouTube. But it's such a treat to hear a lecture that was crafted, tailored very specifically to this place and time. So this is going to be my angle. I want to know more about those stories that connect your experience here to your practice.
Yeah, I have to say, I am one who, I think Winnie, my wife, would agree with this. I'm always looking ahead. I'm very rarely looking backward, and I'm always moving on. And this gave me an opportunity to really assess or inventory and make connections between things that I hadn't really considered. I mean, I knew these things helped me dramatically in my career, but when you sort of put them all together, I'm just like, oh my God, like what? And as a student, I viewed the divisions in the faculty as a negative. Like, shouldn't everybody be singing from the same hymnal? Like, shouldn't you all be teaching me the same thing? And I'm hearing one thing from one professor and another from but that ends up being the huge gift, right? And I think the other thing that is throughout my sort of understanding of the world is that monocultures are really bad and polycultures are really, really great, and in their diversity and ultimately their resilience. And so to have a university where I was exposed to so many different characters, people, ideas, was just really terrific. And I think I knew that, but I couldn't really express it in the same way without going through this thought process.
Great. So that said, I hear that you were involved with Jan in the renovation of the Marion Manely.
Yes.
So can you tell us a bit more about
that? So, this was a great project for us. We worked with the university's facilities. So Jan and I worked on this intently. Those are buildings, what you will know as 48 and 49. And at the time, our exhibition space was on the ground floor of Eaton Hall next to us. So our project developed all three of those buildings. And we, that was quite a project. Max Rormand and Ray Fernandez also helped on the drawings. It was my first experience actually working with the university staff in what I would call the old-fashioned design bid build world, where, as I say, he or she who forgets the most gets the job. So, and that ended up being another great experience for me, just to see how an institution sort of bought the project, bought architecture, how they went about contracting it, and how antagonistic it could be between somebody who is looking for every mistake you made rather than a collaborative partner. So I do think when I look back at that project, what a blessing it was to have it in my literally fourth and fifth year and to be exposed to this, because you sort of take professional practice and it's not very meaningful because you're not using it yet. And I was able to gain some insights to that from that experience. But I also admit that I look at those 40-year-old steel windows and I see the corrosion. I think that's building 49. And I say, well, it's probably okay. 40-year life in the South Florida climate. And again, these were using materials like steel windows that are commonplace in Chicago in our climate, in industrial buildings. And this was, a unique use in South Florida that maybe a little problematic after 40 years. But I do have to say, one of the things that I've always liked about these buildings is how radically it changed culture one way or the other, right? For better or for worse. We were in much closer, intimate surroundings, I guess, as you still are, in those studios compared to the vast open spaces that I worked with or worked in at Skidmore. But I do think that sort of independence that we gained from that and our ability to establish our own environment, I thought was an unbelievable, gift to the program.
We're enjoying them still, and they are getting new windows.
Okay, good.
Larry, I was quite taken by the inventions that you worked on. You showed the 13 projects very quickly.
Yeah.
And really that made me want to hear more about that. But also the solar generator, the fact, I think it would be interesting for the students to hear about this kind of other dimension of the practice in which research, obviously, there's no client asking you to do that, asking you to solve a problem. Right. You've identified the problems or problems yourself. Could you give a little bit more information about that? How does that work?
So specifically, the idea of the solar generator was actually attempting to make this a solution more than about clean energy. It was about actually sort of trying to solve the divide in the United States between rural America and urban America, where urban America is getting all of the resources and becoming more and more extractive in rural communities. And, the further that I delved into a world I had absolutely no idea about, industrial scale agriculture in the Midwest. I mean, the size and scale is, of course, just incredible when you go through these areas. But what I saw developing is a pattern where, like the city of Chicago said that we are going to buy all our clean energy from somewhere else, and we're going to buy clean solar energy. So they took 1 square mile of the nation's most fertile cropland downstate in Illinois and turned that into a solar farm with fences around it. And all of the revenue income would be coming back either to Chicago or to the owners in New York City or wherever they were, and not to the rural community itself. So I guess this is maybe a long way to say this, but when you have externalities that need to be internalized, and I'm talking economically this way, that there's going to be a premium to be paid. And my idea was that that premium should go to the rural community and not to cities, and to stop this knee-jerk reaction that everything a city gets is extracted from a rural community. So that's really the foundation that I don't really admit to very often when I talk about this project, but that's the real purpose of it. And the idea was to use my knowledge of, and again, acquired over 40 years of practice of logistics, how to build things, the fact that when you squeeze the money out of a building, at least 3/4 of it is labor. It's not materials. So is there a way that we could use materials more effectively by sort of flat packing them, getting them to a rural area, and really, instead of focusing on the materials, focus on diminishing the labor, and then allowing farmers or a rural community to erect these quickly in a plug-and-play fashion to establish a solar farm that works with cattle or livestock, with cover crops or whatever their crops are, without fences, and really support the local economy instead of being extractive. That was my long-winded answer.
I'm going to bring you back also to the UM and some interesting stories. There's one related to the chariot race and an encounter with President Foote.
Okay, so it's my second year here. And when we were in the engineering building, the president parked in back of the engineering building and he walked through the engineering building to get to the administration. Well, the night of the chariot race, I pulled an all-nighter and I was painting our chariot at the back door where President Foote would typically enter. And another team during the night had taken paint and wiped out President of the university on his on where he parked and put TAD on it in black letters. And he drove a Model A or Model T, right, an old car that was very, very noticeable. And then I heard it before I saw it. I heard this like, and I go, oh no. Like, what happens to the scholarship? What have I done? What am I going to say? And he sort of pulled in and he stood and looked and then he pulled in and I'm just like, I'm sweating bullets, right? And then he gets out of the car with his briefcase and beelines right for me. And I'm like, okay, this is it, right? Like, what am I going to say? And he walked right up to me and he looked at me and he said, good morning. And he just left. So I dodged a bullet on that one and I did not have to explain. And he ultimately proved to have a pretty good sense of humor.
But you survived.
Yes, I did.
So I wonder if there might be any questions or comments from the audience. Yes.
Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Yes. So this has been a very special day because it began with breakfast with Eric Oz and now ending the day listening to your lecture. And it's funny that both of you have gray hair at this point, which reminds us how long we have been teaching. But there were two things that I wanted to comment on. Number one, that you brought back, so many special moments, but this is not just nostalgia, but actually the way you brought it in terms of how these people made your life special. It's one of the things that I think we all teaching ultimately aspire to, that we have made some difference in someone's life. And you talking about Jan and about Paul. And actually, I don't know whether Mark Reeves actually lives downstairs from where I'm living right now. And now he has had a third life. He's a priest.
Oh, my word.
So, and when you spoke about Rob Hazley, he passed away in 2020. And you brought back again a person that when I started teaching was very, very special too, eventually devoting himself to art, not to architecture. But the other thing that is, I think for all of us, certainly to me, gives us a very, very special joy is when we see people that came out of our program and have really had such an extraordinary career. I mean, I haven't seen you in years, but I've seen your name in the publications. And when I first started seeing it, and I wonder if this is the same Larry Kearns. That's why I asked you if you were originally from Chicago, because the connection with Chicago. And then eventually said, no, this is the same Larry Kearns who was a student. And And what an extraordinary career you've had. And we very, very much appreciate, you coming back and joining us and telling the students of what the arc of your education and your career has been. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for what you've done.
Oh, you're quite welcome. It's been a delight.
It's a question over here. Actually, I can give you mine. Okay.
Presentation. Thank you. Taking you back for that conversation you had in Mr. Codd's that classroom. I also remember for students that are coming to South Florida to study, when you were growing up down here in Miami, buildings that have their mind, obviously, the vocation doesn't come instantly. There had to be something that you remember from your youth. Buildings that really respected Florida, or maybe some that you thought somebody should know about and not try to copy that, good and bad.
Yeah.
I think architecture really mentioned really unique. Or just from your childhood, just wondering what something that sticks out.
I was a child that did all the creative building stuff, right? Erector set stuff. I would always be building stuff. I was a self-taught painter. I loved going to the library and getting books on painting and art. And I actually supported myself in high school doing that. But I have to say, buildings never registered with me directly. And in fact, after that classmate mentioned this to me, I went to the library and I opened books on architecture for the first time and sort of said, what is this? I was completely illiterate about careers. I did not have any sort of guidance counselor that was actually guiding, right? Like I was sort of on my own. But I have to say there were certain things, even almost St. Brendan's classrooms, if you remember on the ground floor, how they had an internalized garden. When I think back to those spaces, I'm like, that was incredible, right? To be able to reproduce that today. So I think I was aware of spaces and what impact they had on me, but I couldn't vocalize that, or I couldn't synthesize that into a potential career. I loved working on drawing and doing layouts for the yearbook, which is why it just dawned on me, well, I should go into graphic design. But really, when that classmate mentioned that to me, it was very late in the year, by the way. It was like March or April or something. It was very late in the acceptance. But I did, when I opened up the books and I started looking, it became obvious to me, which is why I should say, any high schooler that we work with, any high school, we have a program at our office, which is strictly for high school students during the summer, where they come into our office and we work on mock projects and so on. They get a full 2 weeks embedded in our office working on projects. And these are largely because we do so many high schools in Chicago and the area that all our clients know if you have a student who's at all talking about interest in our career, that we do this. And also, I've never missed over, I think it's going on 12 years, a network night for one of the networks of high schools that has a career night. And I'm there every time with all the information because I want to pay it forward. So, yeah.
Well, I have one more question. Were there any other professors at the university beyond the School of Architecture that had an impact?
That's a really good question. I point out Jose Metrani. Metro Rail was not here, by the way, when I was here. It was being constructed. And Jose Metrani was in the engineering department. He was a very energetic, gifted instructor. And I just loved the structure courses, right? Which are typically, they can be pretty dry. What I really enjoyed about his particular view is he also had a course on construction management that I took, which again was hugely beneficial. I mean, this is stuff that I use to this day. And it's not really understanding how we did it back then, but the basic principles of understanding how you schedule a project, just incredible, right? So I have to say, outside of the School of Architecture, that was one course and one instructor who really made an impact. Also, just to go back to Jose's comment, I felt like if I was going to mention Mark Reeves, I should get in touch with him. So I emailed him after 40 years or 45 years of not seeing him and said, "Hey, Mark," and I explained what I was doing and if he remembered me, and he remembered me right away. He said, "No, of course I remember you," and then blah, blah, blah. And so we corresponded back and forth, and I wanted to see him when I was here. He's, of course, in Italy right now. But, there were people, and again, educators, I'm sure this is like part of the issue, right? Like you graduate these people and they go off and you never hear like what happened, right? Like what impact you had on them. So it is important on an occasion like this for me to recognize what the impact has been, right?
So, Dean, perhaps that's a good ending. We might thank you again for it was a beautifully crafted presentation. And we'll stay here for a little while if people would like to speak with you individually. So thank you again, Larry.
Okay, you're welcome.